for our last session before another break, the penultimate session. And well, Mr. Newson, I was expecting you to introduce me because now I'm the one being called on stage. While you stay here, I do not introduce you therefore, but perhaps maybe the title of your intervention, Sovereign Secure Infrastructure, a Practical Approach to Building Defense-Grade Capabilities.
I thought we agreed I was going to get a break and you would do some of this.
Indeed. Indeed. I missed the cue.
Hello again. So, thank you. This could be real quick because we did cover quite a lot of it in the panel sessions, so, you know. Okay. All right. So, what is this and what is it not? This is intended to be some guidance and some of the learnings that we've had at ICEYE around building defense-grade capabilities in the space industry. What it is not, it's not a blueprint for success. It's not a prescriptive plan of the things you must do. Hopefully it will give you some questions. It will resonate with the things that you're already doing. But hopefully for anybody that is in a security leadership position or is influencing those decisions, hopefully this will be useful. So what we'll cover is why this matters now, like why the strategic autonomy is even possible right now, and it's not an aspiration. The threat picture, so some examples of real attacks over the past few years. This won't be news to many of us. And also the regulatory landscape, which we just talked about a little, but I have a slightly fancy slide with a timeline. But also some principles to consider about building the right posture and steps to being able to then use that as a launch pad and make good decisions as time goes by. And then sovereignty as an advantage. It shouldn't be seen as again, compliance step or something that we need to achieve. It can be seen as a business advantage. And so then I also want to go through just a few things that are just practical, we can all start doing when we get back to the desk on Monday. So, look, 3 big shifts have changed the game. So geopolitics have changed. Starting with, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It showed us that civilian satellite infrastructure, it was fair game. It was a legitimate target. It was used in the opening hours of the war. China is also building parallel constellations at scale, at speed, and also actively probing for IP, for influences from the West as well. And again, something that is really surprising, Europe finally recognizes the reliance on non-EU providers for space-based intel. It's not optimal. There have been some events where it is proven that not having that sovereign capability can leave gaps. And again, the industry has changed. New space has rocketed, but it's compressed the development time, from a decade to some years, from billions to millions. The speed creates that competitive advantage. It really gives new space companies the edge. But it does create a drastically increased attack surface. And that speed introduces, vulnerabilities, things that can be leveraged. And, not all new space companies are ready for that. And the regulation has changed. Again, the EU has moved from voluntary contribution and adherence to some guidelines to mandatory cybersecurity obligations across the entire infrastructure stack. These declarations of being a critical infrastructure provider. This is actually pretty significant because, as we know, living in the EU, it can be slow sometimes. So I'll touch on that a little bit more. So what does sovereignty actually mean for us in space? There's a whole ton of things, and it's a very popular buzzword at the moment. But the common misconception is it's not about building and owning everything in-house. This is my interpretation of what it actually means. But it means having verifiable control over the moments where somebody else's reach can be into the system that you control. And that could be, unauthorized access. It could be authorized access, but inappropriate or overprivileged. Sovereignty means having that verifiable control, segmentation, and ability to validate and attest to it. So look, 3 questions that typical defense buyers ask, because this is the market that ICEYE really strongly operates in now. Who can read our intelligence data? The data that we process, the imagery and signals can't be governed by, must be governed by European law. They're not subject to extraterrestrial reach from the US, China, or any other jurisdiction. With the US, I'm referencing the US Cloud Act. I know many of us may be familiar with the lawsuit that Microsoft had in Ireland, where the FBI subpoenaed some data, and a long legal dispute ensued, and there are many other examples that led to the US Cloud Act, which means the US providers need to be able to provide that data. That's not so cool for us in the EU. Another question is, who can command our assets? And this goes back to the cryptographic strategy. Sending command and control signals to satellites. They must be controlled by sovereign European authority. There's no foreign veto, there's no kill switch, there's no override. It has to be maintained in the EU and by people that have been trusted and screened and cleared to do that. Lastly, who can disrupt that supply chain? These are kind of touching on the existential risks to all space providers. Single-sourced or critical components that come from suppliers where the ownership, the jurisdictions, second sourcing that cannot be verified or attested to are all dangerous. I think many of us, again, are familiar with the 2024, activations of the Hezbollah devices. This all goes back to supply chain, and not just physical and manufacturing supply chain, our software bill of materials. These just aren't pretend or hypothetical risks. I'm not going to spend too much time on the CYSAT attack. We have spoken about this at this event and previous years many times. But the lesson really is, the corporate IT infrastructure, it was the gate in. The grounds infrastructure was the way in. Then, other layers failed as well. After 2022, the sustained jamming of Starlink satellites, this was actually a demonstration of how, quickly adapting over-the-air updates could help secure the constellation. That agility that we keep talking about, that's what was demonstrated there. It was impressive, but also a wake-up call. I live in Finland. GPS spoofing is it comes with the territory. If you look at a map and just Google GPS spoofing or jamming, you will see big red blobs all over Finland. It may be due to it's a really cold country, or it may just be because of our neighbors. But look, since 2023, the ramp up and expansion of GPS jamming, which means, that sinister thing of advertising false information, it's just one example. Being able to, at scale, change positioning data. That's a big risk to all of us. These are real examples of things that have materialized that all kind of inform our threat posture and approach. So again, this is the fancy slide, so I will pause for some amazement. Look, regulations are improving. They're converging, they're meeting, and they are also causing PTSD and stress and anxiety for a lot of us. We talked about NIS2 earlier. Live in October 2024. In force, it has some stringent requirements for incident reporting and controls. It's actually a good thing. It's a great baseline. There was a great talk last year by someone, I can't remember who, in the center room about just coming to terms with the Cyber Resilience Act. Again, because it's coming, it's nearly here in some forms. Again, it helps create that baseline. It's not an aspirational thing that we all need to kind of strive towards. It's nearly here. And then finally, the EU Space Act, coming in January 2030. This is dedicated critical space infrastructure regulation. And again, if we're not planning for it now, it's really hard to retrofit. And a lot of it aligns with the CRA, NIS2, control frameworks that we already adhere to. And so it's a continuation. But it takes time. You know, baking this into engineering roadmaps, this can cost money, and that can cost velocity. You know, it can freeze your engineering teams to actually do the thing that they should be doing, which is innovating and solving problems. And if that hits them with very little notice, you know, how many engineering leaders will prioritize that for their next quarter when they need to solve engineering problems? So starting early, starting that compliance clock early is vital. And I'm not going to spend long here. Like, we know what it costs to underinvest. There are the headline figures that we get thrown at, you know, the 15 million or 2.5% of global revenue for not complying with the CRA penalties. You know, theoretical maximums. There's no case law to show what will actually happen yet, but we'll see. This one for me is way more tangible. Lost contracts. You know, losing that opportunity to sit at the table with a customer and win. That's way more important. That is way more tangible to any of us. I mean, defense procurement, it's a long cycle, and it requires very precise attestation, evidence. And without that, like, you don't sit at the table, and you are then locked out for a long time. So if you suffer a breach or a significant incident and you don't handle it well, you don't have that resilience, the time to recover from it can take years. Sometimes some businesses don't recover. And lastly, it's reputation. And again, in the defense industry, defense procurement has a long memory. To kind of get back at that table and to be able to regain the credibility and regain the confidence to show and demonstrate your posture is really tough. And again, going back to losing the opportunity to sit at the table is the biggest risk. Okay. So this is really 5 principles to consider. Treat the ground network and the corporate IT network, for that matter, as the front door. You know, these are the things that are not, they're never done. You've never finished securing your corporate IT network or your ground network. Constantly evolving threats, constantly changing attack surface, vulnerabilities. It shows. It shows that you can't do it, leave it, wait for a couple of years, and then revisit it. It is this continuous improvement and threat modeling. Building security into the supply chain as well. You know, this is a very nuanced thing. It's not just having a product lifecycle management where you can attest to a physical, hardware, or even software bill of materials. It's also being able to attest to your vendors, continual scanning and being able to prove that they are not vulnerable and opening up breaches for you. Every supplier, every component, all of the code must be verifiable. So bolting that on at the end is really tough. It is mitigation and security theater at best. So building it in as part of the early stages of when you're contracting, when you're working with suppliers, when you're sourcing materials, when you're sourcing software is vital. I've said it a couple of times, but assume you'll be breached. You know, assume you already are at one layer or another. React to that. Test it. Try your incident response plans. Continually invoke them, refine them, improve them. It's not an annual exercise because your business continuity plan determines that you must try and invoke your policies. Design for fast recovery and resilience. You know what mitigations you're going to put in place. Model these scenarios. It's kind of the typical thing. If you prepare and you know that something is going to happen, you react, you respond, and you recover from it that much more quickly. Again, making compliance build once and certify many times. This is really key because we talked about all of the different compliance frameworks. It's daunting, and especially for smaller companies, smaller teams, it's a lot to cover. And particularly then, in the new model with New Space, where it is smaller companies, startups even, scale-ups, that are bidding for national defense contracts, it doesn't become a nice to have. It's the floor. It's table stakes to get at the table. And lastly, starting that bureaucratic clock. So things like security clearances or facility site clearances. Most people may know this, but many security agencies and national government agencies are quite busy right now. There's some stuff that seems to be occupying their time. And so security clearances are taking longer. Site security clearances are taking longer. And it can take years in some cases. In Germany, for example, U3, which is the highest level of security clearance there, can take up to 3 years. If you wait until the ink is wet on the contract, maybe you're not going to fill the needs and the requirements of that contract, and you risk breaching it. You can't accelerate it either. So talking about some of the core architecture ideas, the trust boundaries. Concentric trust, so more trust at the center, stronger mechanisms, and just acknowledging the exposure at the edge and more assumption of breach. Making sure that the movement between those layers is controlled, audited, authenticated, and also fully irreversible without authorization. There are no exceptions for a specific customer or convenience. And that's a great conversation to have with engineering teams of, yeah, look, we're not going to create this firewall rule because it's easier to do it that way, which breaks the air gap and the segregation that you have designed as part of your security by design. So the outer edge, corporate IT, third-party ground networks, whatever we want to lump in there, that's the exposed perimeter. Assume it's compromised. If it's not, it will be. In the middle, the engineering systems, the R&D, the things that we're building, these should be limited, principle of least privilege, should be segregated, should be controlled and monitored to a high degree. Then we get into the inner circle, mission operations, mission control systems, satellite operations. These have to have strict authorization. Just-in-time access is wonderful. And at the core, cryptography. And again, I promised as I would not go rogue and be too provocative, but post-quantum strategy, we're too late. Screw that. If we're thinking about that now, then stealing Scott's example, Q-Day is going to hit us in the face. So building that strategy now and not just waiting for quantum computing to become a today reality, being able to have the agility in 10 years' time to adapt to it, that's where we need to be now. Every layer assumes that the next one is hostile. You assume that the signals you get between it need to be analyzed, need to be correlated. It is potentially a threat. So crossing those boundaries between layers, it is a security event. It is something that triggers either automation to restrict, block, and a human to analyze, or it requires something to review it and be accepted. And again, the most sensitive functions fully require segregation of duty. Just-in-time access. It requires, no single individual being able to access things like this remotely or make decisions and control on their own. So, a little bit lighter, but the commercial case, look, it's investment, it's not cost. We all, I think everybody in their career has faced some challenges with justifying security spend in some shape, form, or another. But look, the signals from the market. European defense spending is rising at a horrific rate. It's the fastest since the Cold War, and space has been clearly identified as a priority within that. The investment in IRIS², NATO declaring the 5th operational domain in 2019 being space, member states defining their own individual space policies. And what wins contracts? You know, defense buyers want new space speed, but they want the assurance from legacy primes. So the gap is the opportunity there. If we're new space and we're able to move at that speed, and we also have a good assurance story, that closes the gap, it meets the speed, it meets the ability to do it. So yeah, I talked earlier about being able to attest to the things you do, being able to validate and prove it. This beats marketing claims. I will just skip ahead a little bit because I think we know these things. The thing that kills contracts, the things that lose them. What may look acceptable and what may pass muster in a commercial contract does not work in defense. So the inability to fully map supply chain, to fully map your attack surface, yeah, in defense, that is a no. The origin of critical components has to be evidenced. And again, clearances, background screenings, engineers being able to work on specific customers, their contracts, their infrastructure, their information and data. Without the security clearances, without the background screenings, again, that cannot happen. So looking at the kind of the 90-day action plan. So I would really urge, if any of these things is something you're not doing, consider it, please. You know, a stronger, more resilient space infrastructure for us all is better. Map your supply chain. Identify who your tier 1 and tier 2 providers are. Do your software bill of materials and inventory. You know, look at the tools you're using and make sure you at least know the provenance. Identify your external facing systems. You know where those breaches and those attacks can come, like where those signals are coming from. If you do work in defense and you need to start working on cleared programs, identify the people that need those clearances now. Don't wait until the day that you win the contract and then suddenly aren't able to handle the information that is given to you from the customer. And again, the independent security assessment. Ask partners for help. You know, being able to test and probe and attack your own infrastructure from an independent perspective, it builds your roadmap. Don't wait for an attacker to build it for you. So then longer term, like close the obvious gaps. Separate corporate IT from OT systems. It's fundamental. Corporate IT should always be considered a hostile environment. It has way too many flaws and abilities to be leveraged in any organization. I've worked in FTSE and Fortune 100s with large IT environments, and even at the scale and the automation and the orchestration, that problem doesn't go away. Don't be afraid to initiate the tabletop exercises. Rehearsal, practice, muscle memory is really important. Having the playbooks when you're dragged out of bed at 2 o'clock in the morning is great because you can just do the thing it says rather than having to think and react. Building the threat modeling and threat hunting is an integral part of your processes, your software release cycle. It's vital. And then lastly, building the narrative, you know, tying all of these things that you need to do. You need to get investment from. You know, you may need to persuade a CEO, CFO, the board, investors. If you tie it to the compliance story and you tie it to the strengthening in posture and make it clear that this is a competitive advantage, it's not just an investment in, you know, risk mitigation. It gives you an advantage in the market. So, Compliance is the floor, not the ceiling. It's not something to aspire to or chase. It is just the table stakes to do business. Sovereignty is an advantage. And so, you know, the European space companies and new space companies many of us work in, we're at a great moment right now. We can influence the next decade of how the space industry innovates from a security perspective, and the time to do it is right now. I think I am right at time, but I have one more thing. So ICEYE has a booth. We are here. Come to speak to us. And to be really clear, we are here to recruit. We have so many open roles. We are here to promote what it's like to work at ICEYE, and with the concentration of talent in the space industry, it felt like the right place to do it. So come chat to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Andrew Newson, please have a seat. We have 2.5 minutes left. If someone has a question, please pop them on Connects Me. In the meantime, thank you very much, because we've been talking a lot yesterday about the frontier between civil and military, notably when it comes to China and its state policy since 2008, that the military-civil fusion. And it seems from what you said that even the industry is still a bit behind in Europe.
Yeah, it feels like that. You know, not so long ago, people kind of saw commercial space as a service. Mm-hmm. And now, you know, these conversations happening now. Our CEO, Rafael, published an op-ed about Constellation Europe and the federated nature of being able to build capability in Europe to drive defense capability. That has not been a conversation that's been happening for long, and it is really, you know, in direct response to the growing scale in China, the geopolitical shifts. It is providing capability in Europe for Europe.
Mm. And yet, we've heard a lot also during the previous sessions about, and you've mentioned it yourself, how difficult it was for a business to remain agile, innovation-wise as well as compliance-wise. And you talked about the engineering teams having trouble to comply as well as to anticipate what's coming forth and to cope with the administrative burden of it all. Is it well taken into account, do you think, by policymakers, this kind of double constraint?
It's really not. I think policymakers tend to kind of try to give as much notice of the policies and the regulations. And typically, most businesses are slow to react to that. You know, CISOs, compliance officers are typically quite slow to feed that into engineering requirements. And that's a trick, really. It's making sure that it can be baked in as security by design in our engineering roadmaps. And I think that's something we've been really successful at ICEYE. Mm.
There is, I must say, I have the feeling there is a bit of a mystery here. I'm going to unveil something there. My background is in political science and in European politics. And whenever the European Commission starts a new regulation, there is a huge consultation phase process. And I've been researching a lot on lobbying. And having researched some regulation processes and initiatives, it seems that there are a lot of international actors that are present in Brussels to influence beforehand the upcoming regulation. Microsoft, that was a subject. Big European, not European, but mainly US companies, international groups are there. And I have the feeling that this phase that comes before the regulation, when it is drafted, somehow European actors are not part of the conversation.
I disagree with that to a point. ICEYE, we had a representative lobbying as well. Good. But I do agree. The interests of large providers that are US-centric, they do have a big voice, but rightly so. I mean, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, they all have huge presences in the EU. Mm. And they are also building their own sovereign capabilities to give assurance to customers. You know, Google has its own sovereign, secure, air-gapped infrastructure offering. Microsoft does the same. And so they're building products to address this and to be able to offer the European regulation what it needs.
Maybe we need a big European lobby at some point.
That would be great.
And we are here for that. Thank you very much, Mr. Newson. I think we can give you another warm round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And it's time